Lesson 3.4, Can You Become Addicted to Food? The goals of this lesson are to explain why we feel pleasure from eating and how this pleasure changes in obesity, and to apply what we know about the dopamine reward pathway to the treatment of obesity. At the end of this lesson, students should be able to describe the dopamine reward pathway, compare and contrast drug addiction and the idea of food addiction, and explain how knowledge about drug addiction might apply to dieting. We'll achieve these goals through a Socratic discussion and a jigsaw activity. To prepare for this lesson, you will need to review the key scientific concepts that will be presented throughout the lesson. They include the physiology of hunger, including hormones released from the body that travel to the brain, and how the signals get interpreted by the hypothalamus. You will also need to review the dopamine reward cycle, what it is, and how addiction is related. You can review this scientific content in the background reading provided for you in the teacher primer, the teacher manual, and the student workbook. The teacher primer provides in-depth knowledge about the scientific content presented in this lesson. The teacher manual or lesson plan provides a minute-by-minute explanation of the lesson structure, including instructions on how to manage the discussion and the activity. And the student workbook provides additional explanations for the students. You will need to print out one activity worksheet and one jigsaw reading per student. The key points of this lesson's do now are that when the body has sufficient nutrition, hormones are released from that travel to the hypothalamus to tell us to stop eating. For example, insulin, leptin, and peptide hormones. And when our body needs more nutrients and calories, ghrelin is released from the stomach, which travels to the hypothalamus to tell us to eat more. If food addiction is possible, the treatment of obesity may need to mimic treatment of other addictions. We'll get there by having a discussion with students. You will review the content learned from Lesson 3.3 about hunger and satiety pathways in the discussion. The key points of this lesson's discussion are that hormones are released from the gut and adipose that travel to the brain and signal satiety or hunger. Other signals in the brain activated by eating makes us feel pleasure and happiness. This is the dopamine reward pathway. The dopamine reward pathway is also activated by drugs of abuse. We'll get there by engaging students in a short Socratic discussion. After reviewing the hormones that we learned about in Lesson 3.3, you will ask your students why they may feel hungry even if they have no physiological need for more calories or nutrients. There are external cues, like seeing or smelling food, that make us feel hungry. The cause of this is because food makes us feel good, and we have the dopamine reward pathway to thank for this. After you teach about the dopamine reward pathway, students should be able to find similarities between drugs of abuse and food consumption. The key points of this lesson's activity are that feelings of pleasure from eating food are a result of the dopamine binding to dopamine receptors in specific areas of the brain. We can be conditioned to crave certain foods because they cause a dopamine release. And dopamine receptors can be altered in response to weight gain, so that dopamine signal is not as efficient. This means that more dopamine release is required to reach feelings of pleasure after eating. We'll get there by using a jigsaw. Students will complete one of 6 jigsaw readings in a group, which allows them to explore the relationship between dopamine, drug addiction, and food. These readings include the effect of drugs and food on the reward pathway, how the reward pathway is associated with cravings, the role of genetic and environmental factors on drug and food addiction, stress and consumption of drugs and food, the development of tolerance and withdrawal to drugs and food, and the effect of overconsumption on the brain. Caution: you will want to review the jigsaw readings to make sure that they are at an appropriate level for your class. To help students focus on the most important details of the jigsaw, give each student a jigsaw worksheet that has them take notes on those key points, which are the similarities between drug addiction and food consumption, and evidence researchers have that we can be addicted to food. You can review all this information in the jigsaw worksheet answer key. It has everything organized just as your students will be organizing it. Additionally, the teacher primer and teacher manual go over all the key scientific concepts. After the students have completed their jigsaw reading and taken notes on their worksheets, you'll organize a teach back in which students will teach each other about how eating food is similar to drug use and how we can apply our knowledge on drug addiction to obesity and overeating. The key points of this lesson's wrap-up are that a new approach to weight loss includes addressing food addiction. And like drug addiction, food addiction is a chronic condition which may involve both periods of remission and periods of relapse. We'll get there by having a short discussion. This is a current debate amongst researchers and policymakers, so there is no correct answer. The answer to this question has implications for treatment of obesity. The key points of this lesson's homework are that every research article asks one big question, which should be explained and answered by the end of the article, and that levels of hormones related to hunger and satiety are changed during weight loss, but don't reach the normal levels of a lean person that was never overweight. We'll get there by having students read a scientific article using the QMDC model as a guide. Students should have started working on this homework in Lesson 3.3. You will work through the paper together as a class in Lesson 3.5. This is a straightforward lesson, but you will want to be comfortable with the scientific content in the jigsaw readings before using this lesson in your classroom. Be sure to allocate enough time at the end of the activity to connect all the dots for the students, or have them connect the dots in the teach back. At the end of this lesson, students should be able to describe the dopamine reward pathway, compare and contrast drug addiction and the idea of food addiction, and explain how knowledge about drug addiction might apply to dieting. If your students took the Neurological Disorders module, they may see connections to the ND Unit 5. We discussed hunger and satiety signals as well as the dopamine reward pathway in Lesson 3.3. If you have any questions, concerns, or feedback, you can contact any of the CTSE team members and we'll be happy to help you.